Do you notice anything different about this version of Victoria 3? Maybe additional history, journal entries, maybe flavor or flair, playable nations, different types and locations on the map? Well, that's what I noticed when I first loaded into it initially, when I saw the Carlist revolt inside of Spain, and that led me to looking at this list of additional features, where I noticed that there were additional countries to play, tags around the world, flavor in the form of characters, journals, events, all based on history, and so much more. And that got me into playing a few different playthroughs with this mod pack, and I can comfortably say that the Victorian flavor mod is definitely one to watch. Not just for what it already delivers in its relative infancy, but also in its planned features. This seems like more of a future rework, a long project of love rather than a quick mod update. Full credit to the people and team behind it, not a team that I'm personally associated with, though they did reach out to me personally and say, hey, why don't you check out our mod? As many people do, this one was worth reporting on in a mod spotlight kind of video. So why don't we jump in and take a look and talk a little bit about the Victorian flavor mod, because I think it's a mod that delivers what a lot of you have asked for. More history, more events, more rich detail, not just in the characters, but also in the world that is Victoria 3 and the nations that we can play as or compete with. Already you've seen in this video me detail some of the things that this Victorian flavor mod delivers, like new German minor states. You could probably count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or more of them, which you can toggle on and off. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. These states and micronations, of course, have different interactions with the others around them. The Russian border as well picks up some new neighbors, of course. The Congress of Poland that I just showed you, as well as the Grand Duchy of Posen, a puppet of Prussia. We'll take a look back there in a little bit. What I'd like to note here as well, just quickly, is that this mod initially released just a few days after Victoria 3 came out on October 30th, and all of the things that we've already discussed, well, so far in 2 minutes and 30 seconds of the video, came out within the first sort of month or so of its release, and it continues to receive frightfully regular updates. I'm quite impressed, in case you can't tell. Moving across, you'll notice some changes to Persia and other flavor changes to different borders across the map. Some areas of the map have been focused on more than others. Again, slightly early days in some areas of the project, and as we saw at the start of the video, they have plans to expand out much further. However, as we look across to Africa, and next we'll move to the Americas, you'll notice there are new formed nations, playable nations. A lot of them, of course, relatively minor in the scheme of things, but some of them significant in terms of geopolitical context in the world. For example, here in Africa, not only looking over to modern-day Madagascar do I see some extra fun and flavour, but more importantly around Cape Colony, one of the game's tutorial nations, and of course linked with Her Majesty's mighty British Empire itself, has some interesting new nations around its border. Definitely some fascinating playthroughs here, not just because of these nation states and their role in Africa, but also, of course, within the wider British colony, and also some areas over near Canada and others. A really fascinating example of a slightly accelerated colonialism is seen here as well. Compared to the base game, at least, additional flavor and history is added in. There are additional colonial territories, holdings, outposts, whatever you want to call them here in this part of Africa, as well as some additional playable nations. Too many, of course, individually to cover, but hopefully as we go around this fly-through and I talk through some of the changes, you'll get a feel for it. It's important to note as well that the mod doesn't just change map, playable nations, and the sort of flavor and history that goes with them, but also aims to adjust the gameplay as well. And perhaps the Russian-American company is a great example of that. As you can see, it's a chartered company that added in the most recent update to the mod, version 0.4, which came out last week at the time of recording, which added the chartered company subject type. The chartered company, as we saw with the Russian-American one, is a new type of dominion, effectively, and with it come new independence journals, diplomatic plays to force the dissolution of chartered companies. Could be an interesting one, as well as various events that go with that too. In that update, by the way, of course, there were a whole load of other additions, not just to things that we see up front on the map, like this new insignificant power here, and the redrawn borders of the Americas, which received a lot of attention, particularly at the start of when the mod released, but also some things behind the scenes. New cultures, right? Those things that are affecting the game maybe not immediately obvious to the player up front, but they really matter behind the scenes when it comes to things like nation forming, for example. New cultures in and around Finland, the Baltic German culture, and many others. The history and flavor elements that are added to the game are really quite special as well, but some areas do remain untouched or less touched than others. Oceania and perhaps the Pacific, a good example of that. I note few changes to New Zealand, of course one personally close to me, but I'm sure that will come in the future, but also some changes around Australia and also in these sort of Southeast Asian territories too. It's important to note though that they don't shy away from focusing in on both minor and major powers. I note looking through the patch notes that there are new journals and histories and character entries for Hawaii and the Hawaiian Islands, not irons, which by the way, were added additional provinces to split them up. Another small feature, and it really goes to highlight the flavor that this adds. Of course, here we're looking at Great Qing and its many now tributaries or puppets, right? The Korean Peninsula, Joseon, now not the only one in that real hotbed and a really interesting place to play now. Great Qing, of course, still remains the most powerful, but it's not the only great power in the region. Of course, here you can see me starting in with Russia, another nation that, of course, sees a lot of love and attention here, not just because of its own historical changes, but also because of the ones around it and around its borders. As I mentioned at the start of the video, Prussia picks up a new puppet. Prussia, by the way, also has something that I'm sure many of you will be very excited about. In fact, why don't we take a look at that now? Inside of the game rules section, you'll see some new options added into the game. This allows you to turn on and off things that we've already discussed, like the minor nations inside of Europe. If you're like, I want to play with this mod, but I don't quite want that level of detail, you can turn it off and on. Other things as well, like the Poland that we were talking about before, the Congress of Poland, can be turned on and off. The German minor states, North American decentralized states as well. Those borders redrawn to remove some decentralized areas between the US and Mexico. And finally, that sweet, sweet yellow Prussia. No longer do you need to get a specific mod to do that. I would encourage you to at least check out this wonderful mod pack to go in a little deeper. And of course, all of the sort of unrecognized nations or newly drawn ones are, at least to my knowledge and to the developer's best intentions, more focused around the real minor details of history, the drawings of borders, and how they relate back through to various historical treaties. And if you look through the patch notes, I've studied them fairly carefully in preparing for this video, you should get a feel for that as well. In terms of playability, I think this mod strikes a really great balance of delivering some fun history, some initial new characters and journal entries, and fairly pleasing, simple, easy to play changes. The changes in Europe make it a more interesting and diverse place with more options to play with or against, but more broadly around the world, I like the historical flair that it delivers. It definitely has more to go, and as I mentioned at the start of the video, that's kind of part of their thing. You see, the VFM Victorian Flavor mod is designed to be a comprehensive overhaul of Victoria 3, a successor, by the way, to many mods that expanded on Victoria 2. So there's a lot of history here, if you will. A major focus of the team will be on creating a more realistic simulation with minimal railroading. The team, by the way, consisting of multiple founding members of the Victoria 2 modding server and Victoria 3's mod co-op. So there's a lot of history behind the team, and it goes to show, because their planned features for the future include additional flavor for most playable countries, and already they haven't skimped on focusing on minor and major ones. I was personally drawn, as you can see, to having a closer look at the Russian-American company myself. Seems like a particularly fascinating one. Moreover, though, the mod also, of course, currently tweaks the AI to be more aggressive and gives it additional claims. Something that is, I think, not just a side benefit, where the main benefit is, of course, more historical flavor, but actually another thing that many Victoria 3 players have been asking for, so it's wonderful to see. In future, though, they aim to rebalance the economy and AI further, something I'll be interested to follow to see exactly how they approach it, but looking through the Discord server, the history, some of the stuff on GitHub, I'm personally, quietly, and actually quite confidently optimistic about the future of this project. There are a couple of other things that they aim to do, including overhauling the map with even more accurate borders. You'll see many of them around here in the Americas. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the areas that they initially focused on in some of the initial patch notes for the mod, but also adding more countries and more states within or around them. Something that personally excites me. I don't know, I like playing as major nations and great powers, but I also really like messing around with things like the Russo-American company, for example. I think there are a lot of fun and interesting things that can happen when you play as a minor, somewhat oddball nation in a game like Victoria 3. The VFM also aims to rework certain aspects of the tech and goods trees, sort of leading in with that rebalancing of the economy that they're working on. And finally, they'd like to add more historical characters to appear as leaders, something that is, of course, a big part of the flavor of Victoria 3, although sometimes can be easily overlooked if you're not really deep into the events that are coming up, and in particular, if those events don't actually focus on the leaders, because of course we don't directly control them. They're just one piece of that puzzle. The main puzzle piece that we're staring at most of the time, of course, being the map. And just to reiterate, this mod pack does a fantastic job pulling in new playable nations. And something that's got me really quite interested and excited about following it, not just because of the historical flair or fun with the Russian-American company, is their ability to tackle things that aren't just face value. It's not just a redrawing of a border, an expansion of a Texas, or maybe more gold added in Australia. You know, they're really not afraid to pick this apart, and that goes to show, I think, in their experience and in what they've done. The Chartered Company is a great example of that, a new subject type that replaces previously they used a dynamic name for the Dominion, but that's besides the point. The important thing is that they're really getting under the hood and finessing at a level of detail that I would expect from more significant developments, and perhaps more official developments. And as Victoria 3 is but only a couple of months old, I can't help but be excited to see what the Victorian flavor mod has to offer in future. It is of course not alone. There are many other great mods, including the Grand Overhaul that we've already watched on the channel, and I have another video as well covering some great mods for Victoria 3. So if you'd like more mod content, this video will be part of, hopefully, I will remember, a newly created playlist with all of my mod videos to check out additional mod spotlights and highlights. And if you like that kind of thing, I'd encourage you to subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Take care, everybody.